In the winter of 1917, the Western Front had already swallowed millions of men. Both sides were exhausted, frostbitten, and mentally worn down by years of stalemate. Yet, in this frozen stretch of scarred earth, something happened that almost feels like it shouldn't belong in wartime at all. For a brief moment, soldiers who had spent months trying to kill each other stepped out of their trenches with empty hands and honest intentions. They spoke, traded, smoked, and treated each other like human beings instead of targets. It hooks because it's not soft or sentimental. It exposes the raw truth that even in hellish conditions, combatants sometimes break through the madness long enough to remind each other why they want to survive in the first place. The 1917 Christmas truce is often overshadowed by the more famous 1914 truce, but the later one is just as revealing. By 1917, the war had grown even more mechanized and vicious. Artillery was constant, gas attacks were routine, and casualties had reshaped entire battalions. Commanders on both sides were far more cautious about fraternization after 1914. Yet, despite stricter orders and years of hardened attitudes, pockets of unofficial ceasefires still emerged. These weren't organized, large-scale truces. They were smaller, quieter acts of shared exhaustion. On certain sections of the British and German lines, soldiers calling out through the cold evening air agreed to hold fire, even if only for a few hours, in recognition of a holiday they all understood. One key point to understand is the difference between the 1914 and 1917 truces. The first had an almost spontaneous, widespread quality to it. In contrast, the 1917 exchanges were more discreet, more cautious, and often carried out by soldiers who simply couldn't bear another night of killing during a holiday tied to family, peace, and spiritual pause. The Germans in 1917 were especially eager to establish brief moments of calm. Many accounts describe German soldiers initiating the calls across no man's land, inviting the British to keep things quiet for the night, offering gestures like raising lanterns, waving hands, or stepping out slowly and visibly, unarmed. The British in some sectors responded in kind because the alternative, constant vigilance in bitter winter weather, served no tactical purpose. These informal agreements weren't acts of rebellion. They were survival decisions shaped by common sense and shared misery. The exchanges that followed weren't grand celebrations. They were small, meaningful interactions. One of the most frequently recorded moments involved the trading of cigarettes, cigars, and tobacco pouches, items that honestly held real emotional and practical value. A smoke in the trenches wasn't just a comfort, it was a coping mechanism, a way to steady nerves and fight off cold. Sharing cigarettes between enemies was a direct acknowledgement that, despite uniforms and flags, both sides were living the same nightmare. Some men exchanged biscuits, chocolate, or tinned meat. Others talked quietly about home, weather, or the frontline conditions. In a few places, they even helped each other carry wounded or bury the dead, recognizing that death didn't discriminate along trench lines. For survivalists and military-minded viewers who like applying historical lessons to real-life strategy, this event offers hard, practical insights. The first is that endurance in harsh environments often depends on temporary cooperation, even among rivals. Whether in long-term fieldwork, expedition scenarios, or competitive training environments, short pauses to share resources or coordinate safety can preserve strength for the challenges that follow. The men of 1917, understood that maintaining a small pocket of humanity didn't weaken their military capability. It preserved their mental resilience. Another practical lesson is the importance of reciprocation. The truces only worked because one side offered something and the other answered in equal measure. In high-stress situations, whether survival training, wilderness operations, or emergency response, trust is built through small, consistent exchanges, not grand promises. There's also tactical value in analysing how these truces formed. They weren't negotiated by officers, they were created by frontline soldiers who understood the terrain better than anyone. They assessed the risk, read the mood of the opposing trench, and made a decision based on conditions. That's a real-world survival skill, reading the environment and the people in it well enough to judge whether cooperation is safer than confrontation. In modern survival courses, the ability to evaluate intent through tone, posture, distance and action is a learned discipline. The men of 1917 had mastered it through necessity. When a German soldier held up his hands and walked slowly into the open, the British had to read every detail. Shoulders relaxed, rifle absent, voice calm. Those cues mattered then, and they matter today. Finally, the long-term impact of these small truces is worth appreciating. They didn't alter the war, didn't shorten it, and didn't change military doctrine. But they left behind a powerful example of how shared hardship sometimes forces a temporary return to sanity. For historians, this is a reminder to study not only the grand battles and political decisions, but also the human reactions within them. For survivalists, it reinforces the value of morale, restraint, and controlled empathy, even in hostile environments. If you want more deep-dive history guides like this, covering the battlefield decisions and survival instincts behind moments most people overlook, make sure you subscribe, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and help grow the battlefield survival community.